Today's episode is from history. It's about Aruna Asaf Ali, a progressive thinker who greatly influenced India's fight for independence and galvanized the masses at crucial times. Welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast that will take you on a journey through the rich mythology, folklore, and history of the Indian subcontinent. I am Narad Muni, the celestial storyteller and the original Time Lord. With my ability to travel through space and time, I can bring you fascinating stories from the past, the present, and the future. From the epic tales of the Mahabharata and Ramayana to the folk tales of the Panchatantra, to stories of Akbar Birbal and Tenali Raman, I have a story for every occasion. The purpose of the stories is neither to pass judgment nor to indoctrinate. My goal is only to share these stories with people who may not have heard them before, and to make them more entertaining for those who have. On this show, we cover myths, legends, folktales, and history. Today's episode is firmly on the history side of the fence. We are dipping back into Indian independence history, specifically the story of one woman who dared to be different, Aruna Asaf Ali. Let's rewind the clock to almost a century ago. It was 1930 and winter time in Old Delhi. This scene is set in a haveli, which is the Hindi word for a mansion. A husband and wife were sitting in their chairs in their little courtyard, sipping tea and eating biscuits. That's the part where this stops being ordinary. Aruna was not just a housewife. She was a teacher and worth her salt. After all, she had some of the best education her country had to offer, starting with the Sacred Hearts Convent in Lahore and later All Saints College in picturesque Nainital. And if you were wondering, the answer is yes. Lahore in modern day Pakistan was all part of a single country with the rest of India. After enduring all those years of great education, she decided to pay it forward by teaching the next generation. And yet, remarkable though it was that she had a career, that wasn't the most unusual thing about this couple in this era. Besides being over 20 years her senior, Asaf Ali was of a different religion from Aruna. If some of you thought Priyanka Chopra was quite the pioneer, well, think again. Aruna did something similar almost a century ago. While Aruna and Asaf Ali's marriage did not result in the kind of coverage we've seen a few years ago, their marriage did in fact raise quite a few eyebrows. In fact, with her own family, it did a lot more than just raise eyebrows. Aruna's family completely disowned her and broke off all contact. But sitting here, sipping their hot masala chai, neither of them showed any signs about worrying about any of that. They had bigger things to worry about, now that Aruna had spilled the tea. Figuratively, Asaf Ali had spilled it literally, but that's besides the point. Salt is an interesting choice and may go down well, she said. Her husband had a different opinion. Salt isn't in the same league as tea. They were not talking about eating a namkeen, a savory snack, to go with their tea. Like I said, this was about more grave national matters. A protest against the new British tax on salt. Tea worked well for the Americans up in Boston.
I hear they threw a party, they got wild and tossed some boxes into the ocean. But I'm a little skeptical about salt.
I don't agree. It's the right choice for two reasons. One, it's essential. Everyone needs salt. The British salt tax hurts everyone, and that is a unifying factor, as Gandhi has often said. The second reason, the British underestimate the impact of a salt satyagraha. Our spy in the Viceroy's office told us that Lord Irwin wrote a letter back to his bosses in England. It was about how the prospect of a salt protest does not keep him up at night. Only the mosquitoes keep him up at night. And thank goodness for Odomus. Asaf Ali was still a little skeptical.
Look, I think Gandhi is the salt of the earth and all that. I have a lot of respect for him. And yet, he seems far too optimistic here with this saline solution. What's he proposing exactly? That we all take a leisurely stroll to the seaside and get ourselves arrested for the crime of seasoning our food? How's that supposed to strike fear in the hearts of the British Empire? Gandhi did a satyagraha pilot about a decade ago. How did that turn out?
Not so great, I agree, his wife said. But only because Gandhi gave it up once it got violent. Kinda hard to continue to call it a satyagraha if there's violence. The Bardoli satyagraha, on the other hand, was a resounding success.
I have not forgotten that, Asaf Ali said. I'm sure the British are still pretty salty about it. But that might have been Sardar Patel's leadership that made it a success. And now the British have preemptively arrested him before this salt satyagraha of yours.
I think you're missing the point, dear. It was the farmers who made the Bardoli satyagraha successful, more than an individual like Gandhi or Patel. This salt satyagraha is about each one of us, not just Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, or anyone else. Any one of us could become a leader. All we want to do is to season our food with our own salt and not ruin it down to the tasteless levels of British cuisine. Those words of hers were prophetic. Not the words about the lack of taste in British cuisine. After all, we do have to give them credit for inventing that staple dish that everyone orders at Indian restaurants. Chicken tikka masala. What Aruna foresaw was that anyone could become a leader. She demonstrated that the very next week. She was leading a local group of people in protest against the British salt tax. It was just a simple gathering in an open ground. Aruna was making a speech. Mid-speech, at her gathering, a sub-inspector and a few havaldars walked in. The local police station was trying to meet an arbitrary quota. Maybe there was some competition going on amongst the police on which station would arrest more of these protesters.
Well, 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 what do we have here? The sub-inspector said.
It's just a simple gathering of friends, Inspector, Aruna said calmly.
That can't be it. We've had a complaint. You are occupying this ground, and the kids in the neighborhood wanted to play gilli danda.
This was a completely made-up excuse, of course. The British administration did not care about gilli danda. Besides, there was enough room on this Maidan, or open ground, for several gilli danda tournaments, and for several protests to all happen simultaneously. Aruna tried to point this out. It did not go well.
Add a charge for littering,
the sub-inspector instructed his assistant, while pointing at all the pamphlets. But, but we are still holding these pamphlets in our arms. We haven't littered them, Aruna protested.
That's a mere technicality. Also, you've broken the megaphone rule.
But we don't even have a megaphone.
Then that's the rule. You must have megaphones in order to protest.
This was infuriating. But it's not like the protesters had a choice. Who were they going to appeal to? They went along, quietly. Similar things were happening in other parts of the country. The British didn't take well to the idea of all these salt protests. The British police may even have used pepper spray on the protesters, which was nothing to sneeze at. Aruna was arrested and promptly thrown into prison, along with 60,000 other people. Ironically, Mahatma Gandhi himself was not immediately arrested. Blame that on confusion rather than any kind of benevolence. None of the officers of the Raj was sure if Gandhi's action of making salt was an arrestable offense or not. He hadn't committed assault or anything violent, and they didn't really have a strong code for dealing with white-collar criminals. One officer pointed out that even if they extrapolated from the standard procedure, they could forcibly take the shirt off of his back, or they could sew the pants off of him. But everyone agreed neither of those could apply to Gandhi, as he did not wear pants or a shirt, only a dhoti. You can bet that the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, was not pleased that Gandhi was still free. And actually, neither was Gandhi. The difference between them was that Gandhi was going to do something about it.
I'll write Irwin another letter and tell him everything about the next march and the next salt protest. He won't be able to just shake it off.
Mahatma Gandhi's wife, Kasturba, didn't see the point of this. Listen, if I want to rob the Kohinoor diamond, I won't send a letter to the guards giving away all my plans. I'm just going to rob it. Sarojini Naidu chimed in. Technically, that wouldn't be robbing. The Kohinoor is ours, so it would be a rescue mission, not a heist. But that's besides the point. I'm with Kasturba on this one. I don't see a point. If you get arrested, who continues the marches and protests across the country? You would, Gandhi said calmly. He had a point, of course. Satyagraha would continue whether or not he was there. Lord Irwin might have taken Gandhi's previous letters with a grain of salt, but no more. Lord Irwin's staff, suspecting some kind of trickery, had soldiers lined up a day in advance of what Gandhi had mentioned in his letter. But there was no subterfuge here. Gandhi was arrested exactly according to his plans and at his communicated date and time. Sarojini Naidu played a major role in continuing the protests, as did a few others. There was an unexpected bonus. Public reaction to his arrest was a little bit more than he had anticipated, all in a good way, because it brought world attention. And for the first time on the global stage, Gandhi and his ideas of nonviolence began to be taken seriously. All that attention did lead to some pressure and ultimately roundtable discussions between Gandhi and Irwin. Irwin agreed to let people make salt, but only if their place of residence was by the sea. After all, the British had to be seen not to be giving in too much and too easily. This deal had to be seen as a true compromise. Anything else would just be rubbing salt in fresh British wounds. One of the positive outcomes was that all political prisoners were to be released. And that was something that Gandhi had in particular championed for. However, Aruna was not released. She was held back on a charge of vagrancy, of all things. "For goodness sake, I live in a house 20 minutes from here," she said, exasperated. But the police found loopholes. The house wasn't in her name. She hadn't lived there in a few months. "Because I was in prison," she pointed out. But they ignored her, and by their logic, she was homeless. This kind of logic resulted in most of her co-protesters simply refusing to leave prison. And the draw for them wasn't that they were getting 3 free meals a day on government expense. They just could not stand by this injustice. Ultimately, it was only with intervention from Mahatma Gandhi himself that everyone else gave in and left Aruna Asaf Ali behind in prison. I know that makes it seem terrible, but the story didn't end there. You see, there was plenty of agitation from the public outside the prison as well. It got a little worrisome for the sub-inspector. Sure, his stats were pretty high on the leaderboard, but keeping back picketers every single day for just one prisoner? He could afford to give her up. He could just go shopping and grab another one of those Congress members that he had heard about. So the sub-inspector conveniently found a loophole to discover that she wasn't a vagrant after all, and he let her go. That did not last very long, because within a year, Aruna Asaf Ali was back in jail. As a result of more protests, of course. This time, she was prepared. Having had an inside view of the conditions in jail, she came prepared with a 16-point plan for improving conditions for political prisoners. The British Prison Administration was getting a little fed up with her. They correctly diagnosed that all these extra features they were forced to add to their prisons were a result of one person. And to solve that problem, they transferred Aruna Asaf Ali to Ambala. But putting her in solitary confinement was a condition that the Ambala jail warden insisted on. He didn't have a massive budget for improving prison conditions. Ultimately, though, Aruna was set free. And as far as the British knew, she seemed to have given up activism. To the point that they almost made her a poster child for how prison reforms criminals. But they were wrong. She was secretly and deeply involved in an underground movement. Fast forward a few years. It was the 8th of August 1942, and the location was the Gowalia Tank Maidan in Bombay. Bombay was what Mumbai was known as back then. Another firestorm was brewing. This was the Quit India movement. Gandhi made his very famous call to do or die. The more serious version of go big or go home. Britain was deep in World War II, but they did have the resources to act. They judged that keeping folks on the All India Congress Committee would turn this into a worse version of the Satyagraha. So they did what they do best. Take charge of a situation that wasn't theirs to take charge of in the first place. They put everyone in jail the very next day. And by everyone, I mean, every single person they had built up dossiers on. Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, Azad, everyone who was involved in anything to do with the decision to get the British to quietly and orderly exit India. It's ironic when you think about all the turmoil from Britain's exit from the European Union in recent years. None of it even comes close to the chaos, the suffering that people in India had to endure in their fight for independence. Having put all of the leadership of the All India Congress Committee in jail, the British thought they had avoided a major disaster. Yet another miscalculation. The British did not jail Aruna Asaf Ali. Maybe, in typical patriarchal thinking, they underestimated the impact a woman would have had. Regardless, that meant that on the 9th of August 1942, Aruna Asaf Ali was presiding over the Congress session at the Gowalia Tank Maidan. It wasn't just that she hoisted the Congress flag, which gave the masses hopes of an independent India. What she did was to drive home Gandhi's message. The British had acted quickly in silencing Gandhi and other leaders, but Aruna reinforced the do or die message, along with the specific things that went into disobedience. What that practically meant for each person. Things like not supporting any foreign businesses, not watching movies, withdrawing money from their banks, and so on. It had its effect. While most of the leaders were in jail until the end of World War II at least, Aruna Asaf Ali remained on the run, continuing to spread the message. Gandhi sent her a letter pleading with her to turn herself in, now that her work was done. He pointed out that she could herself claim the price the government had put on her head, and then use the money for a good cause. But Aruna rejected that idea. After all, it went completely against the core principle of the Quit India movement, of not cooperating with the British administration. That's all we have time for this time. A couple of notes. Aruna Asaf Ali stayed active post-independence. She even became the first mayor of Delhi. She became a socialist at one point, disillusioned with Congress leadership, and later a communist. What she left behind are examples of progressive thinking, not being afraid to challenge the status quo, and not to be constrained by arbitrary rules. She knew what the right thing to do was, and she did it. Fun fact, her husband, Asaf Ali, was Bhagat Singh's lawyer. And he was also the first ambassador to the US. In the next episode, we'll cover the legend of Harishchandra. Thank you all for the comments on social media and on Spotify's Q&A. I can't directly reply to the questions there, but I'll address them here on this show. Thank you Jen and Kyra for the support. Hiranmai, history episodes can be a bit dry, but I hope you liked today's one. Purushottam, hope you had a good Ram Navami celebration as well. Remind Me and Deep Explorer 08, yes, we just have a couple of stories more to go to conclude the Ramayana. Samay, I do have Vikramaditya coming up very soon. Raj Banga, I don't think I'm the best person to tell a DC Comics story. Arush, great question, but the answer is simple. The Narsimha avatar comes after the Kurma avatar. And yes, I haven't forgotten the Indus Valley Civilization story. It's in the works and I hope to get to it soon. Shalu, thank you as always for your kind words. If you have any other comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories that you'd like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or reply to the questions on Spotify's Q&A. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. You can listen to the show on all podcast apps, and that now includes YouTube. If you want to send me an email, it's storiesfromindiapodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.